You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today I'm chatting to Chris Williams, Managing Partner of Novus Strategy and Consulting. And the conversation today is about technology. But before you all scream into your speakers, not another discussion about technology. This is thinking more broadly about what is happening in the property space. Chris, your background is working with lenders, and actually conveyancing is a relatively new realm for you from our discussions. So great to have you on the podcast. We're going to talk about horizontal digital integration as well. I'm not going to burst your bubble with that one. You can explain that is. But in the first instance, tell us about yourself and what you do, please.
Well, yeah, thanks for the intro, David. As you said, I'm Chris Williams, Managing Partner over at Novus Strategy and Consulting. Novus is a specialist consulting firm that helps organisations within the home buying and selling ecosystem. Typically and traditionally, we've worked within the lending community, helping them to navigate digital transformation, helping them to understand what the landscape of the future looks like and how to kind of evolve within that landscape. My background has been in technology transformation within financial services for over 20 years. So I've sat on both sides of the fence, embedded on programs actually delivering transformational change, but also from a consulting background, supporting organisations go on that sort of transformation journey. Our work at Novus involves strategic consulting, technology delivery, and helping organisations that in this ecosystem, it's about us helping them evolve and go on this next phase of transformation, which is kind of reshaping this industry.
It's very difficult for a lot of conveyancers to visualise what that looks like, I think.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of technology out there. Where do you start with that process of helping a firm look at, okay, here's where I am now. How do we get that visualization of where we want to get to?
I think it's a great question, and there's a couple of things here. The first thing I'd say is that as an organization, Novus doesn't have something to sell. So I'm not here trying to kind of claim the next big thing that's going to change the world for conveyancers, because I'm sure they're pretty much sick of it. And I think I've said in conversations to you before, there's a lot of what we refer to in our world as transformation fatigue. And it's true that I think conveyancers have been bombarded with information about technology. It can be very overwhelming. To answer the question very specifically, the key here is for conveyancers is to focus on solutions that align with your firm's strategy, client needs and operational goals. And irrelevant of sector, in truth, that is at a very macro holistic level. That's what an approach to adopting technology should be about. And at Novus, we refer to strategy as something very simply, it's an old Jack Welch phrase, which is strategy is where you play and how you win. When you simplify it like that, that helps to kind of define really what tech strategy should be about. Not all technology is suitable for every firm. So understanding your unique challenges and objectives is critical. And at Novus, we advocate very much an unbiased and pragmatic approach. So evaluate technology based on its potential to improve efficiency, reduce risk, or enhance client experience. And always look for vendors or solutions with proven interoperability and scalability, because they're absolutely crucial for the long-term success when operating in the ecosystem sort of today and into the future. So it's not easy for conveyancers, but it is vital that they kind of adopt that approach so that they're kind of adopting technology based on their needs, client needs and operational goals, but with the future in mind. From sitting very observantly in this market around the conveyancing ecosystem section of it, I can see and have seen that there's been a lot of noise around tech almost revolutionizing certain elements, and that's just simply not going to happen. It'll be an evolutionary process for conveyancers. It's just taking that approach of assessing that, and they can do it.
Strategy is where you play and how you win. A lot of conveyancers would sit here and understand that conceptually,
Mm.
but the goalposts move constantly. How do you know if you're winning?
Well, this is all to do with what does success look like? And the definition of a business is a commercially profitable enterprise. So winning is, are you a commercially profitable enterprise and have you got growth opportunity? And so where you play, which is the first part of strategy, should enable where you win.
Okay, let's look at some of the things that are happening in and around conveyancing then. And what I mean by moving goalposts is things like there's uncertainty as to quite where settlement is going to go. As an example, how can a firm prepare for something that may or may not happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. It makes sense. Look, I think for a lot of people listening, they're probably thinking, oh, it's all right for management consultants to say these sort of things. They don't exist in our world. You're not a lawyer or a conveyancing lawyer. And I understand that, and it's a fair cop. That said, I exist in a world where we have to look at these things and we help organizations to configure themselves to be responsive to change. And as kind of the old phrase said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive. It's the ones most resistant, most adaptive to change. And so in order to kind of be adaptive to change, you've got to configure yourself in a way where you can be much more agile and you can course correct. And you can only do that with foresight, i.e. what's coming down the track. Now, the great thing about this industry sector is that actually nothing happens overnight. And that's also quite a criticism sometimes for this industry sector. And I understand it. Look, I've been on both sides of the fence, and we exist to help organizations plan and prepare and kind of implement the transformations that are coming. And so it's about being prepared for that, and preparedness, what that looks like is how you configure yourself for agility in practical terms. Something like synchronization, if we touch on that as a topic. Synchronization is a Bank of England initiative, and synchronization is in the property context, the movement of the money and the lodgement of the title at the same time. But synchronization as an initiative spans a whole broad range of asset classes. And as a conveyancer, we can see that coming down the track. There is lots of time to kind of look and prepare for that. And what that looks like is it potentially is a business model change for some conveyancing firms. If you're heavily reliant on client funds sat in your client account, and that's a revenue generating thing, well, then having agility means that you can begin to model financially, well, what's the impact to us and what are the alternatives? How could we improve things? And the reason the Bank of England are doing this is quite simply settlement risk. But specifically from the property use case, it's actually about, well, how can we improve capacity in the system? Why does everybody move on a Friday afternoon? Why can't we choose and select? And I know, again, these things might frustrate. Well, this is how we've always done it. But things change. And the way that the transaction process works in this country is something that is going to change, because property and the property transaction process, if the capacity can be increased within the country, that means liquidity can flow much quicker. This is way, way bigger than is the property transaction process, good or bad from a synchronization standpoint. This is about liquidity in markets. This is a huge thing. And so back to the specific sort of point about conveyancers and preparing themselves for these things and how do they kind of do it, it very much is about that agility and configuring themselves to be responsive to the changes that are coming down the track. And the good thing about this industry sector is that actually you can prepare for that and you can model it.
The context here is, as you say, a Labour Party that has committed in its manifesto to building 1 million new homes, which all need transacting.
Yeah.
And the fact that a lot of the consumer market is driven by the property market. I can't remember, is it something like £20,000 the average consumer spends in the first 12 months after purchasing their property on white goods, soft linens, that kind of thing? It's a real driver of market economics, isn't it?
It is, yeah, 100%.
We've touched on settlement, so let's stay in that realm. What other key initiatives are happening in and around this space that conveyancers need to be aware of if they're going to do that agility piece that you've mentioned at the start?
Another critical area is the ongoing evolution of the mortgage process, where lenders and intermediaries are adopting technologies, whether that's open banking, data standards, automated underwriting, ultimately to speed up decision making. That directly impacts conveyancers because it shortens the timelines and places an emphasis more on seamless collaboration. And so when you hear about organizations talk about collaboration within this ecosystem, collaboration actually more broadly is much more about connecting people together. So that another part of kind of the evolution of the mortgage process in those areas, that's happening, and that's happening at quite some pace. Additionally, there's increasing focus, as we well know, that's driving what I've just said there, is data standards and interoperability, particularly as part of horizontal digital integration, or HDI as we refer to it. This push toward better connectivity and shared standards across the system is essential for conveyancers. And it's essential for them to stay competitive and deliver a more smoother client experience. So in summary, the key things that are happening from the front all the way to the end at a very high level is data standards. That's kind of driving the horizontal digital integration, which I'll kind of explain in a bit more detail in a second, which is ultimately being underpinned by the maturity that now exists in the market. You then, as you move into the more sort of workflow area, you've got the evolution of the mortgage process with lenders, intermediaries, and their adoption of technology and the automations that they're bringing in. And AI is playing a key part in some of that, especially in the kind of lending space. And then right at the end, which we've already touched on, is obviously synchronization. But, as well as synchronization, you've got things like the regulated liability network, which is come out of UK Finance. There's lots happening. They're the sort of high level sort of initiatives, and they're definitely going to impact conveyances. What's kind of driving a lot of this, and I think I'd really like to try to get this across to your listeners, because this is quite important, is everybody's heard of digital maturity. What's happened over the last sort of 10 or 15 years in this market is there's been what we refer to as vertical digitalization, digitalization of the component parts in the process, whether that's been estate agents digitalizing their processes, whether it's been law firms, brokers, lenders. They've all had some level of digitalization, but that digitalization has happened independently of anything left or right in the process. That's a very traditional digital transformation pathway. But when you've got a highly reliable, interconnected process which requires information to be passed backwards and forwards in order to transact, that vertical digitalization actually creates not just bottlenecks in the system, but it creates friction. And so the analog to digital process actually doesn't always improve things in its first phase. In isolation, it improves things. That said, when you put it all together, it doesn't. And if there's one metric that everybody in this industry can kind of look at and agree on that's actually gone in the wrong direction, it's the time to transact. That's not gone down, it's gone up. So arguably, people could say, well, actually, all this digitalization, it's harder, it takes longer. So, why is that improved? Connected up, it's not an improvement. But in the individual parts, of course, there are improvements in security, there's improvements in customer experience and user experience, etc., etc. But we've now hit quite an interesting and a very, very important pinch point. And this is the kind of the big point that I want to make. And that pinch point is maturity. And we measure maturity across two axes. We measure it from the perspective of the consumer, and we measure it from the perspective as the in-market players. And the in-market players in the property ecosystem have all reached a peak point of digital maturity where there's a mass adoption of digitalization. Without graphs, it's quite difficult to sort of articulate for people to visualize. So you just have to trust me that on the graphs we can demonstrate, we've got the data to show it. But as an example for people to try to visualize it, if you think over the last 10 years, all of the actors in the ecosystem from the start through to the end, to include HMRC and HMLR, have gone through digital transformation programs, still going through them, I accept, but there's still massive amounts of digitalization taking place. COVID accelerated much of that digitalization as well. What we've then got is a consumer that is now, at the start of 2023, over 50% of all transactions that take place are done by digital natives. Now, when you hit that peak, What that then enables is an opportunity to rapidly advance transformation, the second phase of digital transformation. And this happens across all industry sectors. And if you contrast the home buying ecosystem to something like e-commerce, and lots of listeners will be laughing now, saying, what the hell is this man on about, saying that, contrasting what we do to e-commerce. It might surprise you that the average e-commerce transaction has about 37 different touch points on it across multiple areas of an ecosystem. That's now interoperable to the point whereby you and I can order something on our cellular devices right now and it'll land on our doorstep at some point tomorrow afternoon. We'll even be able to track it along its way. Now, I'm not saying that you buy a house on a mobile phone. I'm not going down that route. But what I am saying is that the maturity in e-commerce reached its peak in 2013 when two things happened. Cloud enablement got to a maturity level with adoption, and the consumer market equally had its rise in mobile cellular access with smart devices. And all of a sudden, advertising was coming via smart devices because of Facebook's IPO and things like that. And again, people might think, well, the relevance of this back to conveyancing, and here's the bit that's the maturity bit that's relevant. When that happened in 2013, and we can graph it, the continuation of that curve of adoption of digital and the improvement of the customer experience literally continue to skyrocket. The convergence of this same maturity in this market in property happened in 2023. And what we can see on the graph is we see the line hasn't shot up. And the reason the line hasn't shot up is because that kind of network effect to bring the whole of market together hasn't yet happened. But it's now starting to kind of take that turn. And I think over the next 5 years, those initiatives that I've just mentioned, data, driven by data, the center of the process, and then what happens at the end, kind of 5-6 years from now, all of that is now ready to come together. Independently, they've never all been at a maturity phase in order to drive it at any pace, and now it is. And we've seen it in other markets, and the data shows us that it's there now. And that's the kind of message that certainly our organisation is given when we're asked about it from an intelligence standpoint for strategy into key players in the market. Here's where the next phase, and here now's the time to start kind of moving on that. And they're the big things. What that means to a conveyancer is quite simply stay close to what's going on, follow those paths that we mentioned earlier during this conversation around your firm strategy, client needs, operational goals, and start to configure yourself to be able to kind of assess this stuff as it comes into the market to suit you, your customers, and your organisation.
Perhaps, Chris, if I can put it into layman's terms, and correct me if anything I say here is wrong. This pipe work that you're talking about, there are organizations out there that are sort of starting to look at this. I'm not going to name them. I think there's a lot of consternation around the fact that the property market is so important, and we've talked about that. We've alluded to the value of it. Is this a government initiative? Is it a private commercial initiative? There's money to be made here, isn't there?
There is money to be made. The short answer to the question is, I think government might be a bit too slow to act. I think certainly the data bill and the data standard stuff that comes through will enable that. But if we're going to move quickly, I can't envisage a whole of market infrastructure being brought to pass by government and then that being kind of forced onto actors in the ecosystem to adopt. I actually think a faster way of doing this is that organizations will begin to collaborate, and that's what we're seeing organizations coming together. And at the end of the day, if we look at this, there's going to be kind of 3 tiers. It's going to be, you're going to have your application layer, which will be tier 3. So these are your providers that've got an application or service that sits in one of the vertical areas of the home buying and selling ecosystem. For example, maybe it's an ID. Well, I sell my ID service into these areas. That's kind of layer 1. You'll then have your tier 2 providers, which are more aggregators, i.e. they've got a application that connects left or right of the process. So it kind of interoperates a little bit. And then you're going to have your network layer, which is kind of whole of market. And they'll give the opportunity for obviously people to serve their applications. And that's kind of where this is going. And I think that kind of tier 1 layer, will evolve very, very quickly.
And there's no one organization that's going to win out here. There will be multiple layers, multiple networks, do you think?
I think there will to an extent, and that's kind of, remains to be seen really. But I think that, at the end of the day, interoperability and horizontal digital integration, which is essentially, as it says on the tin, is a horizontal layer connected end to end, digitally integrated. That's a number of people coming together to enable that, to make that to happen. And we can see that happening in the market already.
With a lot of these conversations, I try and put myself into the shoes of somebody who comes into the office, perhaps 7, 6:30 in the morning even, and tries to get on with perhaps doing a title check or reviewing the searches, something along those lines, Chris. 9 o'clock comes and bang, phones start. You've got estate agents wanting updates. You've got clients emailing constantly. I was talking to a conveyancer the other day who had 250 emails in the day. And then at 5 o'clock, phone lines stop. We might get another title checked, or we might, whatever we're going to do, we might do an update of some description. Will some of what you're talking about help with some of those things? Can we automate more of the correspondence? Can we update people better with horizontal digital integration?
The short answer is yes. Look, HDI is just a framework which we use to describe what's happening in this ecosystem at a more sort of holistic level. From a conveyancer's standpoint, all of these things, what you've just described there as their kind of working day, technology can absolutely improve all of that. And from what I've seen in this industry, and having worked with a number of conveyancing firms and been very close to them through our partners who we are contracted to kind of deliver a lot of this stuff, we can see that they are very, very, very open-minded and adopting a lot of technology. But part of the problem is the overwhelm of, well, what's the best approach to do this, and how can we leverage technology better, and which ones should we choose, which applications, which vendors should we be sort of liaising with in order to help not have 250 emails, make this better. And the truth is, there's not going to be a silver bullet. It's an incremental approach to selecting sort of the right things. And the first thing to do is leverage technology to assess technology. And let me put that into perspective. Using good AI tooling today, a one-man band conveyancer all the way through to a 550 firm conveyancer setup could literally take in a view of vendors for a particular service that they want. Say that you're assessing a group of vendors, you could create a very simple question and answers survey that you could get AI to kind of start to assess these people and create you tech radars so that you could understand what and map that directly to your strategic objectives that I noted earlier in this conversation, customer experience, operational, all that kind of stuff. So use technology to assess technology. So when somebody's coming in trying to flog you the next big thing to kind of say, well, this is going to change your world, you can get tech to assess that. And that means that you can get other people in your organization to help. Conveyancers are trained professionally to do high levels of due diligence. They know what to do when it comes to a property, and they can apply those skills to technology. The second thing is to look at this through the lens of a simple 2x2 little chart with investment on the x-axis and on the y-axis. You can have impact, investment versus impact. What's this going to do? The short and obvious answer was yes, it will make a difference. The more detailed answer is here's some practical tools and steps for organizations to actually go and assess technology to then be able to apply it, and that's genuinely be able to kind of make a difference. I mean, every event that I go to, AI plays a part. It's a headline topic for a lot, and understandably so. We have an AI practice, and that's headed up by Pete Gatenby here. AI is key. Don't ignore it. And I'm going to nick one of Pete's phrases here as a sort of parting thought to your listeners, and that is that a human with AI will always outperform a human without it. You can embed AI into your processes carefully, and that can massively begin to have an impact on operational efficiencies. And that directly will impact margin on the bottom line. So that experience that you described a short time ago of a conveyancer. Conveyancer don't necessarily need to wait for transformation to happen to them because there's some tech company that's going to come and do it. They are the transformation that's going to take place. They can own it and begin to deliver it through collaboration and actually self-development of these kind of tools. And the tools are there to start to do that, and AI will play a key role in it. And that would be my sort of part and invitation, would be to lean into that and to give it a go, because those that do will most definitely outperform those that don't.
I've certainly heard it said that the idea that AI will replace somebody's job is a little far-fetched, but what is less far-fetched is that somebody who harnesses AI, and this is really to your point, somebody who harnesses AI will almost certainly do an awful lot better, as you say, than somebody that doesn't. And I would echo that. Looking at how you can use it in your business is only going to be a benefit to you ultimately, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been great to have you share some of your insight. We've crammed it into a very short space of time, and there's so much more we could cover, but we have run out of time. It's been great to have you on, so thanks very much indeed, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Chris. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.